Imagine waking up tomorrow to find that an entire town near you, every house, every street, every family was gone. Not abandoned, not destroyed, but simply gone. No signs of struggle, no footprints leading away, no possessions left behind, just silence, as if hundreds of lives had been gently lifted out of existence overnight. This is not just a thought experiment. History has left us with chilling records of entire villages vanishing without explanation, leaving only empty buildings, scattered belongings, and an eerie stillness that makes the air feel heavier. Tonight, we step into one of the strangest corridors of the human past, the mystery of the villages that disappeared. Sit back, relax, and let yourself be pulled into a story where absence speaks louder than presence. The roads are empty, the hearths are cold, the livestock stand unfed, and somewhere, beyond the reach of history books, the answers are waiting, or perhaps they too are gone. So we begin where all great mysteries begin, with a single question that refuses to stay quiet. How does an entire village vanish overnight? And what force, natural or human, could erase so many lives so completely? Our journey begins in the windswept Scottish Highlands, where the ruins of villages still dot the green hillsides like bones of a forgotten creature. Here, one of the most famous stories of vanishing villages takes place, the Cleared Highlands, as they are now called. Some say these disappearances were not truly mysterious, that they were the result of forced evictions during the Highland clearances of the 18th and 19th centuries. But when we look closer, the picture darkens. Records show entire hamlets that seemed to vanish between one census and the next, leaving behind homes with meals half-cooked, fires still smouldering, and doors left open to the wind. Farmers passing by reported seeing washing still hung on the lines, as if the villagers had stepped out only moments before, but they never came back. Some researchers believe raiding parties or soldiers drove them out overnight, while others suggest sudden disease, famine, or even a panicked flight from some unknown threat. And then there are the stories told by the locals, passed down like whispered warnings. Strange lights seen in the sky the night before the disappearances. Sounds like a great wind that seemed to come from nowhere. And in some cases, livestock found dead or missing. Are these just fragments of folk memory, twisted over time into ghost stories? Or were they the last attempts of frightened people to explain something they could not understand? The truth is lost, but the ruins remain. Stone cottages with collapsed roofs, moss-covered hearthstones where families once gathered. Standing among them, you feel the weight of absence. The village feels like it is holding its breath, waiting for someone to notice what happened. This is just one story, one place where the trail of human presence ends abruptly. But it is not the only one. Across the oceans, across centuries, there are other places where the same silence reigns, and other lives that vanished without leaving a single witness. Next, we travel far from the misty hills of Scotland to the icy expanse of the Canadian Arctic, where an entire Inuit settlement disappeared, leaving behind sled dogs, weapons, and their most chilling clue of all, a still warm pot of food left over the fire. The Canadian Arctic is a land where silence rules, where the wind scours the snow and ice into shapes that seem almost alive, and where human life clings to the edges of survival. It was here, in the early 20th century, that a fur trapper named Joe LaBelle stumbled upon a mystery that would haunt him for the rest of his days. He came upon an Inuit village on the shores of Lake Anjikuni, a place he knew well, home to men, women, and children he had traded with many times before. But this time, something was wrong. The village was silent. No voices, no movement, only the moaning of the wind over the frozen lake. As he stepped inside the huts, he found them empty, but not abandoned in the usual sense. There were furs still laid out as bedding. Rifles leaned against the walls. Food supplies were plentiful, untouched. And most chillingly, a pot of stew still hung over the fire. The embers beneath it faintly glowing, as though the family had been cooking just moments before. Outside, sled dogs were found starved to death, still tied to their posts, as if their owners had never returned to feed them. Labelle felt the weight of something he could not name pressing down on him. He reported the disappearance to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who launched an investigation, but no bodies were ever found. No footprints in the snow leading away from the camp, no signs of a struggle. Nothing to explain why an entire community had walked away from their lives. Some suggest a mass migration, but why leave so suddenly, in the dead of winter, with all the tools of survival left behind? Others whisper about starvation or disease, though nothing in the camp suggested panic or illness. And then there are those who speak of stranger explanations. A sudden ice collapse pulling the villagers into the lake, or even encounters with something not of this earth. The story has since passed into legend, retold around campfires and in hushed tones, but the village remains gone. The snow has long since covered the footprints of whatever happened that night. From the frozen north, our path now takes us to a much warmer place, to the American Southwest, where a great civilization once thrived, and then, as if on cue, abandoned their cities and vanished into the desert winds, leaving only their empty stone pueblos behind, far from the ice and snow of the Arctic. Under a blazing desert sun, another disappearance continues to puzzle historians and archaeologists alike. In the canyons and mesas of the American Southwest lie the remains of the ancestral Pueblones, a people who built complex stone cities like Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde. They carved homes into sheer cliffs, constructed ceremonial chambers called kiva, and built roads that stretched for miles across the desert. For centuries, these communities thrived, leaving behind pottery, tools, and intricate rock art. And then, around the late 1200s, they were gone. Entire settlements were abandoned. Kivas were sealed, food stores left behind, and no clear record exists of where the people went. When you walk through Mesa Verde today, you can still feel the presence of those who once lived there. The smooth sandstone walls seem to hum with memory. Some researchers point to a decades-long drought that made farming impossible, forcing people to migrate elsewhere. Others suggest famine, conflict between neighboring groups, or outbreaks of disease. But there is another theory, one that adds a darker edge to the story. Archaeologists have found evidence of burned villages and mass graves, suggesting a period of violence and social collapse. Were these cities abandoned willingly, or were their inhabitants forced to flee? Even more unsettling are the reports of cannibalism discovered in some sites, bones bearing marks that indicate they had been cooked and consumed. Were the people driven to this by desperation, or was something more sinister at play, perhaps ritualistic in nature? The desert holds its secrets well, the dry air preserving the ruins, but not the answers. Walking through the silent plazas and climbing the narrow ladders into the cliff dwellings, it feels almost as if the people might return at any moment, stepping out of the shadows to reclaim their homes. But they do not return. The wind whistles through the empty doorways, carrying only questions. Where did they go? What were they running from? And why did they never come back? From the desert mesas of the Southwest, Our journey now takes us across the Atlantic to the mist-shrouded isles of the North Sea, where another small community vanished without warning, leaving behind a lighthouse still burning and a mystery that would trouble investigators for over a century. Off the coast of Scotland lies a lonely, windswept island called Ellen Moray, one of the remote Flannan Isles. In December of 1900, a supply ship approached the island to deliver provisions to the lighthouse that kept watch over the treacherous waters. But as the ship drew closer, the crew noticed something strange. There was no one waiting on the landing platform to greet them. The lighthouse flag, usually flying proudly, was missing. And most unnerving of all, the light itself had been dark for days. An almost unthinkable dereliction of duty for keepers tasked with guiding ships safely through the stormy seas. When the relief team climbed the steep, jagged steps up to the lighthouse, they found the door locked from the inside. Once inside, they discovered a scene that felt eerily frozen in time. The kitchen table was set for a meal, but no one had eaten it. A chair was overturned, as if someone had risen suddenly. 2 of the 3 keepers' heavy oilskin coats were missing from their hooks, but the 3rd was still there, suggesting one man may have gone outside without proper protection against the elements. The logbook contained strange entries, reports of severe winds that seemed to shake the entire island, followed by a note that one of the keepers had been very quiet and another crying. The final entry simply read, "Storm ended, sea calm. God is over all." After that, silence. No bodies were ever found, no wreckage, no sign of a struggle. The most common theory is that a giant wave, a so-called rogue wave, struck the island, sweeping the men into the sea as they tried to secure equipment. But skeptics point out that the island sits nearly 150 feet above sea level, making such a wave almost impossible. Others whisper of murder, of madness, of one keeper turning on the others before throwing himself into the sea. And of course, there are the stories of something otherworldly, strange lights seen in the sky that week, strange sounds heard by passing sailors. Whatever happened on that lonely island, the lighthouse has stood ever since, its beam cutting through the mist, a silent monument to 3 men who walked into history and never returned. From this remote island mystery, we move next to the American frontier, where an entire colony disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only a single, carved word as their last message to the world. On the coast of what is now North Carolina, an experiment in colonization turned into one of the oldest and most haunting mysteries in American history. In 1587, more than 100 settlers, men, women, and children established the Roanoke colony, hoping to carve out a new life in the wilds of the New World. They built houses, planted crops, and awaited supply ships from England. But when those ships were delayed for 3 long years, what they found upon returning to Roanoke was chilling. The settlement was deserted. Houses were dismantled carefully, not destroyed, as if taken apart in an orderly way. There were no signs of battle, no graves filled with bodies, no traces of struggle. The only clue left behind was a single word carved into a wooden post, Croatoan. It pointed perhaps to Croatoan Island, home to a friendly indigenous tribe, but when searchers went there, they found no trace of the missing colonists. Some believe the settlers simply joined the Croatoan tribe, blending into the native population. Others suggest they attempted to sail back to England on their own and were lost at sea. There are darker theories, too, that they were massacred by hostile tribes, or wiped out by disease, starvation, or even cannibalism. More unsettling, are the rumors of strange sightings in the years that followed. Blue-eyed native children said to speak English words. Ghostly figures reported near the old colony site, and unexplained lights in the forest that frightened other settlers who later came to the region. The word Croatoan itself has since taken on a strange, almost supernatural aura, popping up in other cases of mysterious disappearances throughout history, even appearing in the diary of Edgar Allan Poe shortly before his own unexplained death. Walking the grounds of Roanoke today, the forest has swallowed much of what was once there. The wind rustles through the trees, the birds cry overhead, and the carved word remains a whisper from the past Croatoan. What did it mean? Was it a destination, a plea for help, or something far stranger? From the sun-bleached shores of Roanoke, we now journey deep into the heart of the Amazon rainforest, where explorers have encountered entire villages seemingly abandoned overnight. The jungle reclaiming homes, as though they never existed at all, deep in the Amazon, where the canopy blocks out the sun and the air feels heavy with moisture and mystery. There are stories of villages that have vanished, as if swallowed whole by the jungle. Explorers and anthropologists have long reported coming upon abandoned settlements, sometimes just days after they had been bustling with life. The huts stand intact, tools still lying where they were used, fires reduced to embers. Food remains half prepared, as though the inhabitants intended to return any moment. And yet, the people are gone. The forest is silent, save for the drone of insects and the distant call of unseen animals. In some cases, entire villages were known to have disappeared between visits, with no signs of migration paths, no footprints leading away. Some researchers point to disease as the likely culprit, epidemics brought by early explorers that wiped out entire communities. Others suggest more violent explanations, raids by rival tribes, or slave raiders who once prowled these regions, taking captives to sell to colonial outposts. But then there are the truly strange accounts. Missionaries and travelers reported finding villages where not only the people were missing, but where the surrounding forest seemed different. Trees bent unnaturally, strange patterns carved into bark, eerie silence that felt almost staged. In some traditions, the shamans speak of the Yor, spirits that can lead entire groups of people away, deeper into the jungle, never to be seen again. Whether myth or metaphor, it paints a chilling picture, a force in the forest that can call to entire communities and make them disappear. And perhaps most unsettling of all is how quickly the jungle reclaims what is left behind. Within weeks, vines creep over empty huts, insects fill the cooking pots, and the village looks as though no human hand ever touched it. To walk through one of these sites is to feel like an intruder, in a place where something sacred or something terrible has happened. The rainforest gives no answers, only more questions, and the silence is louder than any explanation. From the humid, shadowed depths of the Amazon, our path now leads us to a remote corner of Russia, where an isolated Siberian settlement was found eerily empty, its last residents seemingly swallowed by the endless taiga without leaving a single clue. In the heart of Siberia, where the forests stretch for thousands of miles and winters can swallow a man whole, lies one of the strangest disappearances ever recorded. In the 1930s, Soviet officials reportedly came upon an abandoned village deep in the taiga, a place that had once been home to several families of old believers, religious exiles who had retreated far from civilization to escape persecution. Their wooden huts still stood in neat rows, smokehouses and storage sheds still filled with supplies. Tools were left on workbenches. A half-mended fishing net hung on a wall. And on one table sat a loaf of bread, hardened with age but unmistakably abandoned mid-meal. There were no signs of violence, no tracks in the snow leading away, no graves to suggest disease had claimed them. It was as though the entire population had walked into the forest and simply dissolved into the white silence. Soviet investigators searched the surrounding area for miles, but found nothing. No bones, no clothing, no signs of a struggle. The only living things they found were wolves, circling the edge of the settlement, strangely unwilling to come too close, as if something about the place repelled even them. Some theories suggest the villagers may have fled in fear of government persecution, retreating even deeper into the wilderness, but in such harsh conditions. Without taking food or clothing, survival would have been nearly impossible. Others whisper that the settlement was struck by a rare but deadly natural event, a gas release from the permafrost, perhaps, or poisoned water that drove the villagers mad. Then there are the more haunting suggestions that the villagers fell victim to something far older and more mysterious, something that stalks the deep forest and calls those who live too close to its heart. The story has lingered in Russian folklore ever since, a warning about the dangers of living too far from the world of men. Standing in such a place today, you can hear the snow creak under your feet, the trees groan in the wind, and somewhere in that vast emptiness, you feel as though you are being watched. From the frozen desolation of Siberia, our path now leads us south, to the scorching deserts of the Middle East, where one of history's oldest disappearances, the lost city of Uba, still lingers in the shifting sands like a mirage. Beneath the blistering sun of the Arabian desert lies one of the most enduring mysteries of antiquity, the city of Uba, sometimes called the Atlantis of the Sands. Ancient texts describe it as a thriving center of trade, rich with incense, spices, and wealth, a city that linked the world of the desert tribes with the faraway empires of Rome and India. For centuries, caravans crossed the empty quarter, the Rub al-Khali bringing goods to and from its towering gates. And then, sometime around the 1st century CE, Uba disappeared. Not declined, not faded away over generations, disappeared by the time Islamic historians wrote about it. They spoke of Uba as a city cursed by God, a place whose arrogance brought about its destruction. Some accounts say it was swallowed whole by the desert, its walls collapsing into a massive sinkhole. Others suggest that shifting sands buried it slowly, erasing it grain by grain until it became nothing more than a legend. In the 1990s, satellite imagery revealed what might be the remains of Uba, a collapsed limestone cavern where once a settlement stood. Archaeologists discovered evidence of trade routes converging on this very spot, lending credence to the idea that something catastrophic struck here. Standing on the site, one can see the outlines of ancient towers now half buried, as though the earth itself consumed them. Whether divine punishment, a natural disaster, or a slow death by drought and desertification, the result is the same. Uba became a ghost city, remembered only in myths and the Quran as Iram of the Pillars, a city of great beauty brought low in a single stroke. There is something unsettling about imagining an entire civilization swallowed without a trace, leaving behind no screams, no ruins, only silence. Some explorers claim the site feels haunted, as though the sands themselves are whispering warnings to those who linger too long. As the wind moves across the dunes, it sounds like voices, rising and falling, as if the city is trying to speak. From these shifting sands, we travel next to the cold waters of the North Atlantic, to a fishing village in Iceland where, according to local legend, every man, woman, and child vanished overnight, leaving only the crashing waves and the gulls to tell the story. The North Atlantic is unforgiving, its waves cold and merciless, its storms capable of swallowing ships whole. Along Iceland's rugged coastlines, where cliffs rise like jagged teeth from the sea, lies the story of a fishing village that simply ceased to exist. Local legends speak of a settlement that thrived for generations, its people hardy and resilient, pulling cod and herring from the churning waters. Then, one winter, something happened. When neighboring communities sent traders to barter for fish, they found the village empty. Nets were still drying on their racks, boats tied securely to their moorings. Inside the turf houses, fires were still warm, food sat on wooden tables, and clothes were hung neatly, as if waiting for their owners to return. But the people were gone. There were no footprints in the snow leading away, no signs of a mass departure or migration. It was as though the sea had risen up and taken them, yet the boats were untouched. Some historians believe the villagers may have been lost to a sudden epidemic, perhaps one so swift that the survivors fled in terror, abandoning everything. Others suggest an avalanche may have buried the settlement, though no bodies or debris have ever been recovered to prove it. And then there are those who blame the sea itself, stories of the droga, restless spirits of drowned sailors who, in Icelandic folklore, are said to walk the shores calling others to join them in death. Could such tales be the echo of some real event, a mass drowning or a storm that drove the villagers into the waves? Whatever happened, the site eventually became nothing more than a scattering of abandoned homes, later reclaimed by the wind and grass. Today, only faint outlines remain where the village once stood, a reminder that even the most enduring human communities can vanish in an instant. Standing there, with the waves crashing against the rocks and the wind howling through the empty spaces, one cannot help but feel that the sea remembers and that it is keeping its secret. From the icy edges of Iceland, our journey now takes us to a continent half a world away, where entire cities vanished beneath the jungles of Central America, leaving behind stone pyramids and temples that stand as silent witnesses to their sudden disappearance, deep in the jungles of Central America. Beneath a canopy so thick that sunlight struggles to touch the forest floor, lie the ruins of one of history's greatest civilizations, the Maya. They built cities of stone, towering pyramids that still rise above the jungle, ball courts where games were played for the favor of the gods, and palaces where kings ruled with divine authority. For centuries, their cities thrived, connected by trade routes and united by a shared calendar and writing system. And then, sometime around the 9th century CE, they were abandoned. Not all at once, but in waves, city after city falling silent until only a few scattered communities remained. Archaeologists have unearthed clues, hastily built walls suggesting warfare, skeletons showing signs of malnutrition, and inscriptions that speak of unrest and the fall of dynasties. Theories abound. Some scholars point to a series of devastating droughts that dried up reservoirs and crops, forcing people to flee their cities in search of food and water. Others argue that political collapse, rebellion, or even religious upheaval could have driven the population away. There are also darker theories that the elite class continued demanding sacrifices and tributes even as the population starved, pushing society past its breaking point. Walking through Tikal or Kopan today, you can still feel the weight of this mystery. The temples rise like giants from the jungle, the stones warm under the relentless sun. Parrots and monkeys chatter in the treetops, but the plazas are empty. It is hard not to imagine what it would have looked like at its height. Thousands of people gathered in ceremony, drums and conch shells echoing through the night, and then to imagine the moment when those sounds stopped forever. Some villages survived, and the Maya people themselves never vanished entirely. But their cities, once teeming with life, were left to the creeping vines and roots of the forest. The jungle took back what had been built, wrapping stone temples in green and sealing away the answers to what really happened. From the humid ruins of the Maya, our journey now leads us to a colder mystery, to Greenland, where Norse settlers built farms and churches, thrived for centuries, and then vanished so completely that even their graves seemed to disappear under the ice, across the icy waters of the North Atlantic. The Vikings were not just raiders, but settlers, explorers who pushed the limits of the known world. Around the year 985 CE, Eric the Red led a group of Norse settlers to Greenland, where they built thriving farms along the fjords. For nearly 500 years, they endured the brutal winters, raising cattle, sheep, and goats, building stone churches, and even trading ivory from walrus tusks with Europe. At their peak, the Greenland colonies numbered thousands of people, a stubborn community living on the edge of the habitable world. And then, sometime in the 15th century, they disappeared. When later explorers and missionaries arrived, they found the farms empty, the churches abandoned, the livestock gone. In one church, they discovered a haunting scene, a wedding feast set out on a long table. Frozen in time, the cups and plates still in place, but the guests missing. There were no signs of a massacre, no mass graves, no desperate messages carved into wood or stone. It was as if the Norse simply walked away from their homes and vanished into the snow. Some historians argue that climate change, the onset of the Little Ice Age, made life impossible, forcing the Norse to either leave or die. Others suggest starvation, plague, or even attacks by Inuit hunters, though no definitive evidence supports a violent end. There is also the mystery of why there are no records of survivors. If they had sailed back to Iceland or Norway, surely some mention would exist. Some fringe theories go further, speculating that the Norse may have sailed west, perhaps reaching North America and been absorbed by native populations. But all that remains today are ruins, crumbling farmsteads, roofless churches, and gravestones half buried in snow. Standing among them, you can hear nothing but the wind coming off the fjord, a lonely sound that seems to mourn the people who once called this frozen land home. Their story remains one of the most haunting reminders that entire societies can vanish, leaving behind only the stones they built and questions that will never be answered. From the frozen fjords of Greenland, our path now turns to the heart of Europe, where a medieval village was discovered buried beneath the soil, its inhabitants gone, its homes sealed as though they had been abandoned in a single night of terror. In the quiet countryside of Europe, far from the chaos of modern life, lie countless traces of villages that once thrived and then were wiped off the map. One such place was discovered during a routine excavation in England, where archaeologists uncovered the outlines of streets, cottages, and even a village green, all buried under centuries of soil. What was strange, however, was how complete the abandonment seemed to be. Tools were still lying on the floors of the cottages, clay pots were found filled with grain, and even bones of livestock were discovered still penned, as though the animals had been left to die. There were no signs of fire, no collapsed fortifications, no mass graves that might suggest a raid or a plague that struck so suddenly no one could bury the dead. It appeared as though the entire village had stood up one day, walked away, and never returned. Historians suspect that many of these deserted medieval villages were victims of the Black Death in the 14th century, which killed up to half the population of Europe. But in this case, there were no skeletons, no evidence of panic or burial pits. Others point to economic collapse. Perhaps the local lord raised rents too high, or the soil became exhausted, forcing villagers to leave in search of better land. And then there are the local legends. Some say the village was cursed, that its well had turned black overnight, and that those who drank from it vanished or went mad. Others claim a strange light was seen over the fields in the nights before the disappearance, a light that drew people toward it until they were gone. The site today is eerily peaceful. Grass covers what were once streets. Wildflowers grow where children once played. It is a place where history seems to have been deliberately erased, leaving behind only faint scars in the earth. To walk through it is to feel like you are trespassing on a secret, one that the land itself has chosen to keep. From the buried silence of this medieval ghost village, our path takes us next to the coast of Japan, where an entire island community was found abandoned, its schools, shops, and homes still filled with possessions, as though the people had simply vanished into the sea mist one morning and never came back. Off the coast of Japan lies one of the eeriest modern mysteries, an island once alive with activity, now left to decay in the salty air. The island's name is whispered in urban legend, though locals rarely speak of it directly. In the mid-century, it was home to a small fishing community, a place where life moved at a quiet, deliberate pace. Children ran through narrow lanes, boats bobbed in the harbor, and the village bell marked the rhythm of the day. Then, seemingly overnight, everything stopped. Ferries arriving from the mainland found the pier empty. Houses were left unlocked. Meals still on kitchen tables, fishing nets drying where they had been hung. In the schoolhouse, lessons were half written on the chalkboards, as if the students had simply stood up mid-class and walked away. The strangest detail was that personal belongings, clothing, family photos, even money, were all still there, untouched. There was no sign of a disaster, no storm damage, no smoke to suggest fire, no footprints leading away. Some investigators suspected a mass evacuation due to a gas leak or environmental threat, but no official order was ever recorded. Others suggested the villagers relocated voluntarily, though why they would leave behind everything, even valuables, has never been explained. And then there are the stranger stories. Reports of eerie blue lights seen over the water on the night of the disappearance. Strange sounds like chanting heard by fishermen passing the island, and rumors that a series of drownings had plagued the village in the weeks before everyone left. Today, the island stands as a haunting time capsule. Wooden houses creak in the wind, tatami mats rot where they lie, and the school remains frozen in time, the last words on the blackboard fading but still visible. To visit is to feel an almost physical weight pressing in, as though the island itself remembers what happened and does not want to be disturbed. The sea laps at the edges of the abandoned harbor, slowly reclaiming the land. From this island, shrouded in sea mist, our journey now takes us to South America, to the windswept plains of Argentina, where an entire town was submerged beneath. A lake for decades, only to reappear, ghost-like, years later, with its buildings eerily intact. In Argentina, There is a place where time itself seems to have drowned and then clawed its way back to the surface. The town of Villa Epicuén was once a thriving tourist destination, known for its saltwater lake that supposedly held healing properties. People flocked there for summer vacations, staying in the hotels that lined its streets and soaking in the mineral-rich waters. But in the early 1980s, nature turned on the town. Torrential rains caused the lake to swell beyond its banks, and over the course of several years, the waters slowly swallowed everything: streets, homes, schools, even the cemetery. By the late 1980s, Villa Epicuén was completely underwater, its residents scattered and its memory fading into legend. For decades, it remained that way, a town entombed beneath a shimmering inland sea, unreachable and unseen. Then, in 2009, after years of drought, the waters began to recede, and what emerged was something out of a dream. The entire town stood revealed, eerily preserved. Rusted street lamps leaned toward the sky, concrete buildings stood like skeletons, and twisted car frames were scattered where they had been left decades earlier. Walking through it feels like stepping into a photograph that had been hidden in an attic, faded, fragile, but still holding the essence of life. Tourists now visit to see this ghost town, its streets coated with a crust of white salt, giving everything an otherworldly glow. Some former residents return to walk the streets where they once lived, pointing out what used to be their homes, their favorite cafes, the places where they fell in love. But for many, the return is too painful. It is as though they are visiting the grave of their own past. Scientists studying Villa Epicuén say the town is a rare example of an urban area preserved almost perfectly by water, a kind of accidental time capsule. Yet there is something haunting about it, as if the lake itself is reminding humanity that it can give and it can take away whenever it pleases. And this leads us to the next case, a settlement not reclaimed by nature slowly, but lost all at once, high in the American mountains, where the only clues left behind were scattered belongings and a single cryptic word carved into wood. Few mysteries in history have inspired as much speculation as the disappearance of the Roanoke colony. In the late 1500s, more than 100 English settlers landed on Roanoke Island, off the coast of what is now North Carolina. They came, seeking a new life in the New World, carving out a settlement among the dense forests and marshlands. Life was hard, supplies ran low, and the colony's governor, John White, eventually sailed back to England to gather reinforcements and provisions. But when he returned 3 years later, the place was deserted. The fort was intact, the houses dismantled in an orderly way, and there were no signs of battle, famine, or disease. The only clue was a single word carved into a wooden post: Croatoan. It was the name of a nearby island and of a friendly native tribe, leading some to believe the colonists had simply moved there. But no trace of them was ever found, not on Croatoan Island nor anywhere else. For centuries, historians and archaeologists have tried to solve this riddle. Some believe the settlers were absorbed into local tribes, leaving behind English bloodlines hidden in the genealogies of the region. Others suggest they may have perished from starvation, fled inland in desperation, or were wiped out by hostile forces. But the mystery only deepens when we consider the absence of human remains, signs of violence, or any clear indication of struggle. It is almost as if they planned their departure, took everything they could carry, and vanished into the wilderness without leaving another trace. Writers and storytellers have long been fascinated by the image of an entire colony slipping away silently into the unknown. leaving behind that single haunting word as both a clue and a farewell. Standing at the site today, surrounded by pine, trees, and the sound of the wind, one cannot help but feel the weight of that unanswered question: where did they go? The disappearance of the Roanoke colony reminds us that even in an age of maps and records, whole communities can still dissolve into legend. From the forests of early America, we now turn to the frozen tundra of Russia, where a much more recent village was found abandoned, its last moments preserved in a chilling stillness that no one has been able to fully explain. In the remote reaches of Siberia lies a place that feels untouched by time, and yet strangely disturbed by it. The village of Plaskoy was once a small but self-sufficient community, a scattering of wooden cabins huddled together against the brutal winters. Life here was harsh but steady, with families relying on hunting, fishing, and the rhythms of the tiger to survive. Then one winter, in the mid-20th century, something happened that turned Plaskoy into one of Russia's most haunting mysteries. When a supply team arrived after the spring thaw, they found the village completely empty. Fires had burned out in the stoves, half-eaten meals were frozen on tables, and sleds were still tied outside, as if the owners had intended to return. There were no signs of an attack, no blood, no tracks in the snow leading away, only an eerie stillness. Even more unnerving was the discovery of personal belongings left behind: boots, coats, tools, and in one house, a child's toy carefully placed on a windowsill, staring out into the endless white. Soviet authorities investigated, suspecting that the villagers might have fled en masse due to a natural disaster. But there was no evidence of flooding, fires, or animal attacks. Some speculated about a sudden outbreak of disease that forced a hurried evacuation. But no bodies were ever found in the surrounding wilderness. Then came the stranger theories that the villagers encountered something they could not explain, something that drove them away in panic. Locals speak of strange lights in the sky that winter, of booming sounds that seemed to come from deep within the earth. Some even whisper about government experiments in remote areas of Siberia during that era. Projects so secret that whole villages might have been silenced to keep them hidden. Today, Plaskoy lies in ruin, the log cabins collapsing under the weight of decades of snow, their interiors still eerily intact. Travelers who have dared to visit describe an oppressive quiet, broken only by the crunch of their boots and the distant howl of wolves. Standing there, one feels the sense that whatever happened is not finished, as if the village itself is waiting for its people to return. From this icy riddle, we now move south into the arid deserts of the American Southwest, where yet another community was found abandoned, this time with signs of ritual, strange markings, and an even darker story woven into its disappearance. Deep in the sun-baked deserts of the American Southwest lies the ruins of a settlement that has puzzled archaeologists for decades. The town, whose name has been lost to history, was once home to a small community of farmers and traders who carved out a life in the harsh landscape. Their adobe homes, arranged in a circular pattern, suggest a close-knit society, one that shared resources and watched the stars at night under the wide desert sky. But when the site was rediscovered in the early 20th century, it was clear that something had gone terribly wrong. The town was empty, long since abandoned, yet it bore signs that its people had left in haste. Food stores were left uncovered, tools scattered, water jars overturned. And then there were the markings. Strange symbols had been carved into the walls of several homes, spirals and jagged lines that seemed to have been made deliberately, almost frantically, before the people vanished. Some researchers believe these marks could be astronomical in nature, perhaps warnings of an impending drought or solar event. Others argue they were ritualistic, created in an effort to ward off some unseen danger that the villagers believed was coming for them. The mystery deepens with the discovery of several stone altars on the edge of the settlement, upon which charred remains of offerings were found. These were not human remains, but they suggest the people may have been engaging in desperate ceremonies, perhaps pleading with their gods for deliverance shortly before they left. What drove them away? Was it climate collapse, hostile neighbors, or something far stranger? Some indigenous oral traditions speak of a dark wind that came through the desert, carrying illness or death, forcing whole villages to scatter. The settlement remains eerily intact, the desert preserving its secrets with a kind of cruel precision. The wind whistles through the crumbling doorways, and the sun casts long, skeletal shadows across the ground where people once gathered. To stand there is to feel the ghost of fear that must have swept through the town on the night it was abandoned. And as the desert swallows the last traces of this vanished community, our journey takes us now to an even older disappearance, the lost civilization of an entire region, whose cities were swallowed not by desert but by jungle, leaving behind temples and pyramids that whisper of a forgotten world. In the dense, humid heart of Central America, the jungle hides an empire. For centuries, the Maya civilization built great cities, towering pyramids, ceremonial plazas, and intricate stone carvings that told their story in a language of glyphs. At its height, millions of people lived in this network of city-states, their rulers commanding armies and astronomers charting the heavens with uncanny precision. And then, sometime around the 9th century, something happened. One by one, the great Maya cities were abandoned. Palaces stood empty, marketplaces fell silent, and the once busy causeways connecting city to city grew over with vines. When Spanish explorers arrived centuries later, they found only scattered communities and mysterious ruins swallowed by the rainforest, their histories left to rot in the damp air. What could have caused such a collapse? Some scholars point to prolonged drought, evidence of which has been found in sediment cores pulled from ancient lakes. Others argue for internal conflict, civil wars between rival city-states that drained resources and broke the political structure. There are also theories of disease, famine, and even a spiritual crisis that led the people to abandon their ceremonial centers. But there is no single answer, and that is what keeps the mystery alive. Standing among the ruins of places like Tikal or Copan, you can still hear the jungle buzzing with life, almost as if it is reclaiming what was once stolen from it. Massive ceiba trees grow through temple steps, roots gripping the stones as though trying to pull them back into the earth. The air is heavy with moisture, thick and almost suffocating, and the silence between bird calls feels ancient. The Maya left behind their monuments, their writing, and a puzzle that continues to haunt archaeologists. They were not wiped out entirely. Their descendants still live throughout the region, but the disappearance of their cities remains one of the great enigmas of history. It is as though an entire civilization simply decided to walk away from its greatness, leaving the jungle to cover its secrets. And just as the forest claimed these cities, there are other places where water, relentless and patient, has erased human presence, creating ghost towns that now sit beneath the surface like drowned memories. Our next step takes us to a place where divers swim through abandoned streets, their flashlights cutting through darkness to reveal a world that was never meant to be underwater. Beneath the still waters of certain lakes around the world lie entire villages, frozen in time. One such place is Fabrish di Caragine, an Italian village that now rests beneath the waters of Lake Vagli, founded in the 13th century. It was a thriving community of blacksmiths and farmers nestled in the Tuscan hills. Its stone houses, narrow alleys, and Romanesque church echoed with life for centuries. But in the 1940s, the valley where the village sat was chosen as the site for a hydroelectric dam, and the residents were relocated. Slowly, the water filled the valley, swallowing the town whole until nothing was left but the surface of the reservoir. For decades, the village slept beneath the waves, its rooftops and church steeple hidden from the sun. And then, in rare intervals, when the dam is drained for maintenance, Fabrish di Caragine reappears. What emerges is a ghostly, mud-caked version of the town that once was, its streets intact, its church standing as if waiting for parishioners to return. Walking through it is a haunting experience, the ground soft and wet beneath your feet, the air heavy with silence, except for the drip of water from the empty windows. There is something deeply unsettling about seeing a whole settlement pulled back into the world after years underwater, only to know it will soon be drowned again. Visitors describe the sensation as stepping into a dream or a memory not their own. This phenomenon is not unique to Italy. Across the world, there are dozens of towns submerged for dams and reservoirs, some permanently, some occasionally revealed when water levels fall. Divers who explore these sunken worlds tell of eerie scenes: school desks still lined in rows, bridges leading to nowhere, the skeletons of churches looming out of them. These places are not disappearances in the traditional sense. We know exactly why they are gone, but there is something about seeing an entire human world swallowed by water that stirs a primal sense of loss. The drowned village is a reminder that no matter how permanent our creations seem, they can vanish with the turning of a valve. From these ghostly ruins beneath the waves, our path now takes us to a place where there was no water, no storm, no war, just a vanished community and a mystery so deep it became a national obsession. In the Canadian wilderness, near the border of Manitoba, lies one of the most chilling disappearances ever recorded, the case of Anjikuni Lake, in the early 20th century. A fur trapper named Joe LaBelle arrived at the remote Inuit settlement on the lake's edge, expecting the usual warmth of fires, the sound of dogs barking, and the smell of cooking fish. Instead, he was met with a silence so complete it was almost unnatural. The village, usually bustling with life, was utterly deserted. LaBelle found no people, no animals, no sign of struggle or attack. Pots of stew were left hanging over cold fires, sewing projects were unfinished, and food stores were untouched. Even the sled dogs, crucial for survival, were reportedly found dead, still tied to their posts, a detail that has haunted retellings of this story ever since. LaBelle fled to report what he had seen, and when the Royal Canadian Mounted Police investigated, they confirmed the settlement was indeed empty. What they found was even more disturbing. The graves of the village had been opened, their contents removed. Who or what would take the time to disturb the dead during a mass disappearance? Some have speculated that the villagers were forced to leave under duress, perhaps by hostile outsiders. Others suggest a natural disaster, like a sudden ice breakup, drove them to flee towards safety. But the most unsettling theories involve the supernatural. Inuit oral traditions speak of sky spirits and lights that come down from above, and many who tell the Anjikuni story claim there were reports of strange lights seen in the sky around the time of the disappearance. Skeptics argue that the story may have been exaggerated or even fabricated. but its persistence in folklore speaks to something deeper, something that resonates with our fear of being swallowed whole by the wilderness. Today, Anjikuni Lake remains isolated and eerily quiet, visited mostly by researchers, curious travelers, and those seeking to feel the weight of the mystery for themselves. Standing on its frozen shore, one can almost hear the echo of voices that are no longer there. From the desolate Canadian tundra, our journey now takes us to Asia, where an entire city was once said to have disappeared overnight, leaving behind only the ruins of walls and a story so old that no one can tell where truth ends and legend begins. In the rugged mountains of Mongolia, travelers speak of a place that no longer exists, a city that once stood proud, and then was gone before anyone could understand why. Local folklore calls it the City of Whispers, a settlement said to have been built along a trade route that connected the steppes to China. It was a place of markets and music, of caravan bells and storytellers who came from distant lands. But according to the legend, one night the city simply ceased to be. When traders arrived the following morning, they found only empty streets and abandoned homes. The fires were still warm, the doors left open, and yet no living soul remained. What made the story endure is the detail that all the animals, the horses, dogs, and livestock, had vanished too, leaving not even tracks in the dust. Some say the city was struck by a curse, its people punished by the spirits of the mountains for their pride or for breaking some sacred law. Others claim a sudden raid drove everyone away, though no bodies or signs of battle have ever been found. A more chilling version of the tale says the people were lured away by voices in the night, whispers that came on the wind, calling each person by name, leading them out into the wilderness where they were never seen again. Archaeologists have searched for traces of this vanished city for years, uncovering ruins that may belong to it, low stone walls, the remains of clay ovens, shards of pottery. But these finds only deepen the mystery, for they show no sign of destruction. Everything seems to have been left in order, as if the inhabitants calmly walked away, expecting to return, but never did. Standing among the ruins today, one can hear the wind whistling through the stones, sounding almost like voices if you stand still long enough. Whether this city was real or a cautionary tale invented to explain abandoned ruins, it leaves us with the same haunting thought. Entire communities can disappear, leaving behind nothing but questions. From the lonely Mongolian plains, we now cross to the frozen north of Scandinavia, where an Arctic village vanished under circumstances so strange that even modern investigations have been unable to put the matter to rest. High above the Arctic Circle, where the winter nights stretch endlessly and the aurora dances across the sky, there once stood a small fishing village. It was remote even by Arctic standards, a scattering of wooden huts along the coast, smoke from their chimneys curling into the icy air. The people here lived close to the land and sea, harvesting fish and seal, their lives governed by the rhythm of the tides. Then came the night that changed everything. When a supply ship arrived months later, the crew expected to be greeted by the villagers eager for news and goods. Instead, the shoreline was silent. The huts were empty, doors swinging open in the frigid wind. Fish lay rotting where they had been gutted, dogs were gone, and sleds remained lined up as if waiting to be used. Inside the houses, lanterns had burned out naturally, clothing was still hung to dry, and meals sat half-prepared, frozen solid on wooden tables. No bodies were found, no signs of a struggle, and no footprints led away from the village, as though the people had simply dissolved into the snow. the case drew attention from researchers and government officials, who suspected anything from a sudden storm forcing the villagers to flee to an outbreak of illness that caused a mass exodus. But no evidence supported these theories. The more outlandish explanations soon followed. Tales of strange lights in the sky on the night of the disappearance, of a low, humming sound that carried for miles, of shadowy figures seen moving between the huts by hunters days after the last human had been seen. The village was eventually abandoned completely, the wooden structures left to collapse under the weight of snow. Today, only a few skeletal remains of buildings survive, half buried in drifts. The place feels haunted, not by ghosts, but by absence itself, a void where life used to be. Visitors say that under the northern lights, the village feels alive again, as though you can almost hear laughter, barking dogs, and the creak of sled runners, and yet no one comes back. From this icy riddle under the aurora, we now travel to the baking sands of North Africa, where an entire caravan town, once a hub of trade, was swallowed by the desert winds, leaving little more than sand-covered ruins and a legend of a night when the stars themselves seemed to fall from the sky. In the vast emptiness of the Sahara, where the wind sculpts the dunes into shifting mountains of sand, lies the memory of a town that once thrived on trade. It was said to be a jewel of the desert, a place where caravans laden with salt, gold, and spices stopped to rest, barter, and share stories from distant lands. Its wells gave life to travelers, its markets bustled with color and noise, and its watchtowers kept a silent vigil over the horizon. But one year, something strange happened. According to legend, a storm unlike any other swept through the region. For 3 nights and 3 days, the wind howled so violently that it was said the stars themselves disappeared behind a curtain of sand. When the storm finally passed, travelers who approached the site found nothing but dunes stretching to the horizon. The town had been completely buried, swallowed by the desert in a single event. Only the tallest minaret remained visible, jutting from the sand like a lonely finger pointing toward the sky. Over the centuries, shifting sands occasionally revealed fragments of the settlement. A wall here, a stone gate there, pottery shards that glint under the burning sun. Each time, explorers rush to uncover more, but just as quickly the desert reclaims its prize, covering everything once again. Some historians argue that the town may have been abandoned before the Great Storm, its people leaving due to drought or declining trade routes, and the sand simply finished what time had begun. But the more haunting explanation, repeated by nomadic tribes, is that the town was cursed. They say the people had angered the desert spirits, perhaps by hoarding water or defiling a sacred oasis, and so the wind came to erase them. To this day, travelers speak of hearing strange noises when camping near the area, whispers carried on the night wind, like voices calling from beneath the dunes. The desert preserves what it takes, but it does so with a certain cruelty, reminding us that all human ambition can be undone in a single night. From these buried streets of sand, we now move to a final case, one of the most haunting disappearances of all, where an entire mining settlement vanished, leaving behind only rusted equipment, scattered tools, and a final journal entry that chills anyone who dares to read it. High in the remote mountains of South America lies a mining settlement that is now little more than a ghost. In its day, it was alive with the clang of pickaxes, the rumble of carts, and the voices of men calling to one another across the shafts. This was a place built on ambition, the promise of silver and gold hidden in the veins of the earth. Families lived here, too, children playing among piles of stone while their fathers worked below ground. Then, one season, the work stopped. When traders from the nearest town came to deliver supplies, they found the camp abandoned. Tents were still standing, tools scattered as if dropped mid-strike, and the entrance to the mine itself left yawning open. Inside the cabins, everything was untouched. Clothing folded neatly, bread left half-eaten, and ledgers lying open with the last day's accounts recorded. But the most disturbing discovery was a small leather-bound journal found near the main office. Its final entry, scrawled in a hurried, almost panicked hand, read simply, "They are coming out of the dark." No one has ever been able to determine who or what they referred to. Was it a rival group of miners? Wild animals disturbed by the excavation? Or something stranger, something the writer could not bring himself to name? No bodies were ever found in the mine, nor any signs of collapse that could have forced an evacuation. The mine remains open to this day, a black wound in the mountainside, though few dare to go near it. Those who have claimed the air feels heavy there, unnaturally still, and that sometimes, if you listen long enough, you can hear faint tapping sounds from deep within the earth, too rhythmic to be random, too measured to be just falling stones. The abandoned equipment has rusted to skeletons. The wind howls through broken windows, and the whole site seems caught in a permanent twilight. This final story leaves us with the same question that has hovered over all the others. What happens to a community in its final moments, just before it ceases to exist? Do they leave by choice, or are they taken by something we cannot name? The mystery of villages, towns, and cities that vanish overnight is not just a question of history. It is a reminder that disappearance is always possible, that the line between presence and absence is thinner than we dare believe, and that sometimes the earth itself swallows its secrets whole.